On the 9th of November, 1894, a hog drover named Cassius Pruett found a boy sitting cross-legged in the frozen mud at the mouth of Coal Ridge, wearing no coat, no shoes, and reciting numbers to himself in a voice too level for a child who had spent 9 nights alone on a mountain in the first hard cold of the year. Pruett called out twice. The boy did not look up until the third call, and when he did, he asked, without any greeting at all, whether Pruett had counted 6 on his way up the trace. Pruett had not been counting anything. He would spend the rest of his life wishing he had asked the boy what he meant before he lifted him onto the mule and carried him down. The boy was Eli Hardwick, 9 years old, son of a timber hand named Case Hardwick, who ran the steam donkey for the Traver County Lumber Company on the north face of Coal Ridge. He weighed, by the county physician's later estimate, no more than 40 pounds. His feet showed no frostbite, which the physician found harder to account for than if they had been black to the ankle. 9 nights on that ridge in November should have taken his toes if it had not taken anything else. It had taken his mother, his father, and his 2 older sisters, all 4 of whom had walked out of the Hardwick cabin on the last day of October and had not, as of the writing of this account, ever been seen again. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Pruett would later tell the sheriff that he had not thought to ask the boy his name until they were nearly to the mill, and that when he finally did, Eli answered him correctly and calmly, then went right back to counting, as if the interruption had cost him his place, and he had to start over from 1. Coal Ridge sat 11 miles from the nearest telegraph office in Traver County, in the mountain country where Virginia gives way to what would not be West Virginia's own settled interior for another generation. The lumber company had cut a rough wagon road as far as its own mill, and past the mill there was nothing but a pack trail switching up through spruce and laurel, so thick a man could lose the sun by 10 in the morning. The company ran 2 camps on the ridge that autumn, a lower camp of 40 men near the mill, and a smaller upper camp, 4 cabins and a supply shed, where families lived who worked the higher timber. The Hardwicks kept the northernmost of those 4 cabins. Case Hardwick had held the same post for 6 years, cutting on contract, paid twice a month by a company clerk who rode up from the valley on a schedule nobody in the upper camp could ever set their watch by. It was not unusual, in that country, for a family to go a full season without a doctor, a preacher, or a stranger laying eyes on their door. Nobody thought it strange when 2 weeks passed without word from the Hardwick cabin. Distance did that, weather did that. A man learned not to worry until the not worrying became its own kind of arithmetic, and even then he generally waited for the company clerk's regular ride before he sent anybody up to check. Case Hardwick had brought his family up from the valley 6 years earlier because the company paid better for high timber than any farm below paid for anything. The 2 older girls, Ada and Mercy, 13 and 11, had been born in the valley and remembered it. Eli had not. He had been an infant when the family made the climb, and by his 9th year the ridge was the only country he had ever called home, its trails and its weather as familiar to him as any town-raised child's own street. That familiarity matters, because it is the reason nobody in the search party could account for how a boy who knew that ground as well as any grown hand on it had gone 9 days without once finding his own way down. It was the clerk, a young man named Otis Dell, who first noticed the smoke had stopped. He rode the supply trail on the last day of October to pay the upper camp and found the Hardwick cabin cold, the door standing open, the table set for a meal nobody had eaten, 4 bowls, 4 spoons, a pot of beans gone solid on a stove that had gone out sometime the day before. Dell's own account, given later to the county sheriff and preserved in his hand, describes the scene in a single unbroken sentence that runs the length of a page. No sign of struggle, no blood, no disturbance to the yard or the woodpile, the family's good coats still on their pegs by the door, the father's rifle still standing in the corner where a man does not leave a rifle if he is walking into any kind of trouble he can see coming. Dell did not find Eli that day. He did not know to look for him. The company's own muster, filed the following week, listed the Hardwick cabin as vacated, and the search that followed was organized not to find a missing boy, but to determine whether the company owed the family its final wages, or whether the family had simply moved on without notice, which happened more often on that ridge than any company man liked to admit. Eli was found 9 days later, half a mile from the cabin, on a game trail that led nowhere the family had any reason to walk. When Dr. Israel Pruett, no relation to the drover who found him, examined the boy that evening in the back room of the Traver County Courthouse, he wrote in his casebook that the child was underweight but not starved, dehydrated but not severely, and entirely uninjured apart from a scattering of scratches consistent with 9 days spent moving through undergrowth. What troubled the doctor, and what he recorded at some length, was that the boy would not stop counting. Not aloud, not always, but constantly, his lips moving through some private tally, even while the doctor examined his pulse, even while he slept. When Dr. Pruett finally got the boy to speak in full sentences, 2 days into his recovery, Eli did not ask for his mother. He asked the doctor, calmly, whether anyone had gone back up to see if the door was shut again. The doctor asked what door. Eli said the doctor already knew, and would not be moved from that answer for the rest of the week. The full transcript of what the boy said in those first days of questioning does not survive in any single document. It survives in fragments, copied by 3 different hands into 3 different official books, none of which agree entirely with the others. What all 3 agree on is this. Eli told Dr. Pruett that on the night his family disappeared, someone had come to the cabin door after dark and knocked in a particular way, 4 knocks and then 1, and that his mother had told him this meant it was safe to open it. He said his father counted the family before they went out, the way he always did before anyone left the cabin after sundown, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, himself included. He said that when they returned, that habit continued in a way it had not before, except that after that night, the count came out wrong every single time, and no one in the family seemed to notice but him. He said the counting had continued after they were gone, that he had kept doing it himself, out of the ridge and into the doctor's office, because if he stopped counting he was afraid he would not know how many of them were left to count. He would not describe what had actually happened at the door. When Dr. Pruett pressed him on it, gently, over several sittings, the boy's answers narrowed rather than widened, the way a witness's account will sometimes narrow when he is not lying so much as protecting himself from saying the whole of it out loud. He said his mother had gone first because it was her habit to answer a particular knock. He said his father followed because she had not come back in a reasonable time, and his sisters followed their father for the same reason. First one, then the rest. An arithmetic the boy seemed to regard as simply how such things worked. Asked what he had seen when he finally worked up the nerve to look through the door himself, Eli said only that the yard outside had looked exactly the same as always, and that this was the part he could not get anyone to understand was the worst of it. Sheriff Wilson Doss rode up to Coal Ridge on the 3rd of November with the county coroner, Amos Fell, who had sat on more inquests in that county than any other living official. Their combined report, filed 11 days after Eli was found, is a model of the era's plain procedural language. It records the condition of the cabin exactly as Otis Dell had described it. It records that the search parties, numbering as many as 30 men on the busiest day, found no bodies, no blood, no torn clothing, and no tracks leading away from the cabin in any single direction that could be followed for more than a few hundred yards before the ground turned to rock or the trail simply gave out. It records, in Coroner Fell's own hand, that the case would be held open pending further information, and that no finding of foul play could be entered for lack of evidence to support one. It does not record what either man thought, privately, about a boy who would not stop counting to 5. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Sheriff Doss's personal correspondence, 7 letters preserved by his descendants, and never entered into any county file, gives a franker account, than the inquest allowed itself. Writing to his brother that December, Doss describes standing in the Hardwick cabin with Coroner Fell and finding himself unable to explain why the room felt wrong when nothing in it was disturbed. The beans on the stove had gone solid but had not spoiled, which struck him as impossible for a pot left open that many days. The 4 coats on their pegs hung so evenly, so exactly level with one another, that he found himself straightening his own coat without meaning to, before he caught himself doing it. He closes by asking his brother not to worry their mother with it, and by noting he intends to request a transfer to the county seat, a request the county's own personnel record confirms he made and was granted the following autumn. Coleridge was not the only such report on file in that part of the mountains, and it was not even the strangest. 22 miles to the southwest, in the timber camps above Sable Fork, a family named Odom had vanished from a rented cabin in the spring of 1887, leaving behind a table set for supper and a door found standing open by a neighbor who came to borrow salt. The Odom case differs from the Hardwick case in nearly every particular except 2. The neighbor who found the cabin recorded that the family dog was found sitting at the tree line facing away from the house and would not be coaxed to turn around no matter how it was called. And an infant Odom daughter, left behind in a cradle by the hearth, was recovered alive and would say, once old enough to speak of it, that someone had come to count her every night and had always stopped at 4. The second case comes from further north, from a company camp on Raven Knob in the winter of 1879, 15 years before Coleridge. There, an entire 6-man logging crew failed to return from a stand of timber less than a mile from camp. In daylight, in clear weather, on a slope every one of them had worked for a full season. The foreman who organized the search, a man named Garrett Voss, is recorded in the county's own inquest minutes as saying that his search party found the men's axes stacked in a neat row against a tree, blades in, handles out, arranged with a precision no tired logging crew would trouble itself with at the end of a working day. Voss himself resigned his post with the company 4 months later and left the county entirely, a decision his own family later described, in a letter that survives in a private collection 2 counties over, as one he refused to explain to anyone for the rest of his life. Voss's own inquest testimony, preserved in the same county book that holds the Hardwick record, contains a line that reads, "Set beside the other 2 cases, like something more than coincidence." Asked whether he had counted his crew before they went into the timber, Voss said he always did. 6 men, the same 6, for 2 years running, and that on the morning in question, the count had come out 6 both before they went in and after the axes were found stacked against the tree, which was the detail that convinced him something in his own arithmetic had gone wrong, not merely his crew. Between these 3 cases, separated by 15 years and more than 20 miles of hard country, certain details repeat themselves too precisely to be accidental and too strange to be anything else. In each case, something in the scene was left arranged rather than abandoned, a set table, a row of axes, a door propped rather than broken. In each case, a survivor, whether a frightened neighbor's dog, an infant too young to understand what she was reporting, or a boy who would not stop counting, fixed on the idea of a number that had once been correct and had since gone wrong. And in each case, the official record closes not with a resolution, but with a single line, worded almost identically, across 3 separate county books, written by 3 separate hands decades apart, stating that the matter would remain open pending information that never arrived. The Traver County Daybook for the Upper Camp Muster, the ledger the company clerk used to record who was present at each cabin on each visit, runs without interruption from 1891 through the end of 1896. 4 pages are missing from the autumn of 1894, cut rather than torn, the stubs left clean and even at the binding in a way that suggests a blade rather than a hurried hand. What comes before the gap is Otis Dell's ordinary handwriting, recording names and wages in the same cramped columns he used every month of his employment. What comes after the gap resumes in the same hand, on the same schedule, as though nothing at all had happened in the space the missing pages once occupied. Dell himself left the company's employ the following spring and took a clerking position 2 counties away. A transfer his own request for reassignment, still on file, gives no reason for beyond a single line requesting a post further from the Ridge country. No one now working in the county courthouse can say who cut those pages, or when, or on whose instruction. What has turned up, tucked loose inside the back cover of the same ledger when it was rebound sometime in the 1920s, is a single torn corner of paper in a hand that does not match Otis Dell's careful script anywhere else in the book. It is not a sentence, it is a fragment, cut off at the tear, and it reads only, "Keep the count right." Dr. Israel Pruett's own casebook survives in far better condition, held for decades by his family before it was passed, along with a small collection of his other papers, into private hands where it remains today. It is here, in an entry dated the 14th of November 1894, that the doctor recorded what follows. This account was chiefly written to reach. He noted that Eli Hardwick had begun, without prompting, to recite something the doctor could only describe as a counting rhyme, spoken in the same flat, unhurried voice each time, always the same words in the same order. What follows is taken directly from the doctor's transcription, copied into his casebook that evening while the boy slept in the next room. 1 came to the door and knocked it right. 2 opened it before they asked who. 3 went out to see who'd come. 4 went after, and 5 stayed home. 5 is me, and I stayed home, and now the door won't shut again, and I have to keep the count, or they will come back wrong. The doctor recorded nothing else that night except the observation, added in a smaller hand at the bottom of the page, that the boy had recited the same words 9 times before falling asleep, always without deviation, and that on the 9th recitation his voice had dropped so low the doctor had to lean close to be certain the words were the same. They were. Dr. Pruett kept the boy under his own roof for the better part of a year rather than send him to the county poor farm, an arrangement not required of him by any office he held, and one his own family later described as costing him more of his modest income than he ever spoke of to anyone in the county. The doctor's casebook passed down through 4 generations of his family before it was donated, with a small box of his other papers, to a private historical collection 2 counties from Traver, where it can still be examined by appointment. The Hardwick cabin came down within a decade, the ground where it stood second-growth forest now, indistinguishable to a casual eye from any other stretch of that ridge. Eli Hardwick grew to adulthood in Dr. Pruett's house, took up a trade in the valley, and by every account lived an unremarkable and orderly life, save for one habit his own children described to a local historian in the 1960s. He counted them. Every night, before the house went dark, he walked through and counted every child under his roof, aloud, by name, and would not go to bed until the number came out right. His children remembered it as nothing stranger than any father's odd little ritual. None of them ever thought to ask where the habit had come from, or what he believed would happen on the night the count finally did not. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.